when you go out there. Can you go out there, the wrong thing is on? Could you just tell them, take your thing off your head.
The wrong thing is on.
I know. We're good. Get back in there.
Okay.
Get back in there. Okay. Doug's on your head.
All right. Yeah. Good afternoon. I'm here with my guest, C.D. Collins. I've known C.D. Collins for a long time now. Way back at I think I met you at the Cambridge, when they had that Cambridge Poetry Festival. That was a while ago.
Yeah, that's probably right.
Yeah. Now, she's a Kentucky native, and she follows the storytelling traditions of the South, both as a solo artist and when accompanied by musicians. She's one of the originators of the 90s resurgence of spoken word with live music. Her work has been archived in award-winning compact discs, Kentucky Stories, Subtracting Down, and Carousel Lounge. Her fiction has appeared in such fine literary magazines as Salamander, Phoebe, Pennsylvania Review, and My Small Press had the pleasure of publishing her self-portrait with a severed head in 2009. Her novel Afterheat, which is just out, we're going to be discussing today. She has produced short lyric documentary that chronicles the catastrophic steps of mountaintop removal to retrieve Appalachian coal. She has recently completed a novel and is working on a one-woman show. So you were on Poet to Poet, writer years ago, and when your book came out, the poetry collection, Self-Portrait of a Severed Head, a provocative title. Would you be correct to say if you were a provocative writer?
I'm not allowed to cuss on this, am I?
Well,
no cussing.
I would rather.
Yes. I would say that I'm willing to be provocative. And Self-Portrait with Severed Head.
That's a provocative title.
It is. It
was a provocative
I could hardly handle
cover.
it myself.
Yeah.
The cover was my friend, the photographer, Babette Myers. And the way that she photographed herself, the self-portrait, it appeared as though her head were severed. Mm-hmm. And she was commenting upon the objectification of herself in art and what art requires of us.
And that requires a severed head?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It requires the way that we, it requires, for me, sitting in a room doing this pretty unnatural thing of trying to recreate life by putting these little squiggly lines on paper. Mm. Lee Smith, the novelist, said she needs to go out, she needs to write less, to go out and live more, experience more, than constantly writing and chronicling things.
Yeah.
Which is a pet peeve I have, when a poet writes a poem about writing poetry.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We need to have
Ars
more.
poetic?
We need to have more experiences so that we can talk about those instead of the experience of just sitting and writing a poem.
Okay. I would never do that. I don't like that.
I don't like it. We don't like it.
Now, your new book, Afterheat, is based on your experience in Kentucky, right? And it was as a child you were burned over 50% of your body. And the novel integrates the burns the Japanese people received after Hiroshima and the young girl's burns. In a sense, after this traumatic experience, hasn't your whole life been an afterburn?
Well, the book is a novel.
Okay.
And the character, Ruby Chambers, has some similarities with me. But the trajectory of her life is not the trajectory of my life. Okay. I write fiction because I want the freedom to say whatever I want and search for the truth in whatever way that I want to search for.
But you were burned. There
is a chapter in there called Heat that is completely autobiographical. And it is the chronicle of the explosion that I was involved in when I was 10 years old. Mm-hmm. And this explosion touches upon a lot of different aspects of culture. as you pointed out, the character identifies with the victims of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki as they suffered similar injuries. Mm-hmm. She suffers third-degree burns over 50% of her body. And there's these full-thickness burns were like the burns that people suffered in Hiroshima. And her father is a U.S. soldier. And so she has an ambiguous relationship to that war. That generation of people had less of an ambiguous relationship to the war than my generation of people, who don't think that it was necessary to drop a bomb and cause that kind of a disaster on so many people. This year was the 70th anniversary of that bombing, and we commemorated the event in Lexington, Kentucky at Jacobson Park by floating lanterns in the water, which is one way that the Japanese commemorate the dead. And I read from my novel there. And we read from quotes from various people who work for peace.
You know, interesting thing, my late great uncle David Kirschenbaum was a very prominent bookseller. He was Carnegie Books in New York and sold rare collections. And he sold the journals of the pilots of the Enola Gay.
Enola Gay.
Enola Gay.
Yeah.
So I was just reading his obituary again today. I just realized that, but it is.
Yeah, it's this big anniversary this year, and there were some Japanese people there that were very moved that we were thinking of them, and so it was a wonderful event, and in this book. I'm talking about a gas explosion that I was involved in. It was an underground gas explosion. There are all these pipes that run underground all over the country. And the underground gas line that exploded, that burned me and my family, exploded again 50 years later, the same pipeline in the same county. And they think that those pipelines, they don't inspect them very much because they're out in rural areas. And they don't think of people being out there. But we were out there. And some footage, I made a short video about my experience. And there's a man in Kentucky who made a documentary film about some people in Kentucky, some rednecks, some lefties, some righties, some nuns that got together and stopped a pipeline that is similar. It's like Keystone's XL. It was called the Bluegrass Pipeline, which is basically fracking effluvium being put into those repurposed old pipelines to run through our state with no benefit to us. And it was $1 billion operation, and you wouldn't think a bunch of little people could stop it, but we stopped it. So I've been invited to be on panels. I'm in the movie discussing that. So that just goes to show you that what we do counts, and we can stop these billion-dollar things, not to give up, not to have despair.
Now, you're not only a poet, but you were saying you're a documentary filmmaker, and you were just describing the documentaries of what you were doing. Did you? Two questions: is Michael Moore an inspiration, and did you get a lot of flack from the industry when you were doing this?
Yeah, I get a lot of flack in general, and I adore Michael Moore. He cannot make a wrong move in my book. I love everything that he does. I cannot believe he's alive. He's alive. He keeps on telling his stories.
Yeah.
And
so you think the coal industry would actually try to knock him off?
Well,
I mean, the industry sees attacks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Accidentally. Yeah. Oh,
How
sure.
about you? Have you ever your life threatened at all?
Well, yeah. Many times. Not by the coal people. I did go up to research up there at Massey Coal, and they did not want to talk to me. I was taking some footage, and I have an album that I guess I haven't listed yet. My most recent album is called Clean Coal, Big Lie. And the title song, Clean Coal, Big Lie, is being used, in various initiatives. I just give the song away. It's a big lie. There's no such thing as clean coal. Mm-hmm. Coal is dirty. And what's unknown is that mountaintop removal, which is not strip mining, it's not deep mining, it's knocking off the mountaintops into the valleys burying 1,700 miles of streams, destroying the lives of the people. When you blast off a mountaintop, you crack foundations, you crack wells, you ruin the water supply, you ruin the roads. And something they use to wash the coal, it's called coal slurry. They have these big ponds, big impoundments. One of them sits above a high school. So my culture is being destroyed by mountaintop removal. People know it's dirty, but they don't know that it's destroying my culture. And it doesn't provide that many jobs, because dynamite is cheaper than hiring people, than hiring coal miners. They have these machines, they're called drag lines, and they're 20 stories high, and they're the size of a gymnasium. And they can take 300 days to take a whole mountain down. A mountain.
How many days?
300 days to take something that took 300 million years to form.
Okay. And is that still going on?
It's still going on. Less, but it's taken. When you go to, say, Hazard, Kentucky,
right,
you drive down the road and you'll see these beautiful mountains. If you get in a plane, you see a moonscape, because they want to hide what they're doing. But there's no trees, there's just a moonscape where they've blasted those tops off of the mountains. It's a terrible way to mine coal.
You shouldn't have coal anyway. I mean,
leave it in the ground, people.
Yeah, I mean, and the coal miners, they just prosecuted the head of that coal mine that collapsed on the miners.
Yes,
I was just
yes,
reading about
yeah.
that. Now, when you had told me about a writers' retreat that you wanted to start years ago in Kentucky. What's going on with that?
Well, here's what's going on with that. A couple of things. I have a farm in eastern Kentucky, Mount Sterling, Kentucky, and I put a down payment on that farm when I was 16 and paid for it until I was about 30. And even on a poet's salary, I've managed to hold on to that farm. And it's got a Victorian cottage on it, and it's got 3 bedrooms. And so I've made it into a writer's retreat. I was renting it out for money, but then people were cooking meth in my kitchen and growing pheasants inside my house. I just kicked everybody out. And I've been restoring it for the past 10 years with my friend Ray Oney. And now I'm renting it out as an artist retreat. It's called the Savannah Retreat.
Oh.
And I rent it out through Airbnb.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And my mother was lifted to higher ground on March 13th. And I'm starting an initiative to make the rest of the farm into the Lula T. Collins Wildlife Sanctuary. And I've been working on this for a while. I've gotten a couple of grants to remove invasive species, to improve the habitat, to plant native grasses, and restore it as a savanna like it once was.
So the writers' retreat, you specifically asked for writers and artists to...
Well, yes, because what we're missing is quiet. And even
so in other words, you just can't go there for a vacation. You have to be a serious... Do you ask for like a... Yeah.
Well, no, you can. But who comes there are writers. I just had a woman, a playwright, there leave yesterday who is from Connecticut. She had a play premiere at the Louisville Playhouse a couple of weeks ago. Someone's coming to work on his dissertation in June.
And you get these from the Airbus,
Airbnb.
Yeah.
And when they see the review of writers, because we need peace and quiet. That's what we need. We need to be surrounded by beauty. And so that's what I'm trying to provide. But I'm charging so that every dime I make goes into the farm, goes into a variety of projects. And it's an old house. It's 1890. It's a beautiful house. The first house built on that road and the last working farm on that road.
Now, you've been described as one of the one of the people involved in the resurgence of the spoken word.
Yes.
Tell us about
yes.
the genre that you...
Yes, it was completely accidental. We weren't thinking we're starting the resurgence of something. Jeff Robinson Trio. There was a band that came down from Vermont called Miss Bliss. And my car had broken down in Boston. I was on vacation to Maine. And it broke down at 5 o'clock on a Friday, and we had to be in town over the weekend. We went to Man Ray, And I saw this all...
A great club in Cambridge.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. Is it still around?
I don't know. I don't know. I never go out. I go to bed at like 10 o'clock. So there was an unbelievable lineup of women playing rock music. And I looked at Babette and I'm like, maybe we should move here. We don't have that in Kentucky. So she got into the museum school. We moved up here. I was teaching high school. And eventually...
Where were you teaching high school?
At Montgomery County High School, where my alma mater. So eventually we moved here, and I ended up being in a band with some of those members that were in that band. And the bass player, the drummer, and we had a violinist, and we called our music chamber rock. And they said, just come on in and bring a poem. So they played their music. I brought a poem in. They would improvise to me, and we put an album out, Kentucky Stories, in 1999, and it won the Best Spoken Word Album that year at the Cambridge Poetry Awards. So we got started there. Jeff Robinson at the Plow and Stars, and we were just doing it. But it did turn into a thing.
Yeah, Jeff does the thing with jazz accompanied.
He accompanies. He's unreal.
Yeah.
That trio is psychic and spiritual and talented.
Yeah, I've been there at the Lizard Lounge in Cambridge.
Lizard Lounge. You do a poem, and they come in and they interpret that poem musically, effortlessly. It feels like.
Yeah, well, they've done it so long.
They've done it for so long, but they have that ear.
Yeah, they have
the ear. They're listening. What I do now, I'm working with. I had a band, the women band that was chamber rock, called Pin Curl, and then I had a band called Rockabetty for about 8 years, and now I'm working with a musician who is a blind, autistic musical savant from Russia, and he just graduated Berkeley last year, and we're doing an album called Night Animals. He's a pianist and a violinist, and we're doing storytelling, spoken word. So that'll be my 5th album.
Now, author Stephen Macaulay said you're a natural storyteller. Was there a big oral tradition in your family?
There is a big oral tradition in Kentucky because we are still sitting on our porches stringing beans, and we have a style of storytelling that really is unique. And I brought a friend down, and I had to train her. Don't try to guess the ending of our story. The whole point is the story. Even if you know the ending, just ask questions, just listen, make that the rich experience, the journey through the story. And so, my mother who recently passed was the very best. And they're not thinking, I'm going to tell this wonderful story. It's just a way of being. We make the time to talk.
So why don't you read from your new, I think you're going to read from your new novel, Afterheat.
Afterheat.
And why don't you just do that for
Okay.
us? And that can be purchased at Amazon, the usual places, I imagine.
It can be purchased through Empty City Press.
Empty City Press.
Yeah. We are not on Amazon yet, but if you go to my website, cdcollins.com, you find the link to Empty City Press, which is
Are you reading anywhere?
I am. I've been doing a lot of readings, doing book clubs. I'm happy to come and do book clubs with people and appear. And I'm doing a reading at the Malden Public Library as part of a grant that's coming up.
Great.
That'll be on my website.
Go see her.
Go see me. I want to say that Afterheat is a technical term. It is when there was the tsunami and the resulting nuclear explosion in Fukushima. Nuclear fire is a fire that you can't put out. And that phenomenon is called afterheat. And afterheat, by analogy, can also be like memory, a fire that you can't put out. In my hometown, your name unfolded like an accordion book, revealing your entire history. You were born into a caste, a genealogical blueprint of expectation as plain as the facts on your birth certificate. It was hard not to take what you were handed. Fairchild meant doors flew open all the way to an Ivy League school. Franks meant doors whisked shut in your face if you dared set foot on the threshold. The black folks lived on a rocky hill in the East End, while the West End was reserved for brick mansions with wide sloping lawns. If you were a gold iron, you mowed those lawns and tended the rambling flower beds. A gold iron meant sparklers and Fritos on a Friday night, because that's all the fun you could afford, and that the roof over your head was rented. Inside the mansions lived families whose very mention stirred a fragrant breeze. Names that conjured images of croquet games played by children dressed in white linen, and of wintering in the Caribbean. These were the Fairchilds, the Graysons, the Downs. Handsome families whose gestures were calm and elegant because they did not have to grab to get what they wanted, and soft, well-modulated voices because they did not have to raise them in order to be heard. In our town, your name determined if you were placed in calculus or general math. It decided your salary, who you married, and where you were buried. The part of town you were born in was a taproot that extended down into the earth, anchoring you for better or worse. I was born at Chambers, which meant you had dirt under your fingernails and skin stained from whatever crop you were handling. Rust red when stripping tobacco in the fall, or indigo palmed in summer when blackberries were in the full. Our third grade teacher, Mrs. Oldham, stood tall behind her oak desk, calling out, "Anderson, Bellamy, Bartley, Chambers." When we answered, she riveted her eyes on us like a brand. She was deciphering the puzzle, reading backward into the past and forward into the future. "It's all in the blood," people said, as though it were impossible to pry apart the pieces of your destiny and put them back together some other way. A few school kids lived downtown, not in one of those richly painted Victorians stationed like queens along Green Street, but where Green crossed over Broadway, dropped on down to Locust Street with its railroad tracks and strip of honky-tonks. The names spelled out in neon: the Blue Moon, the Walking Horse Inn, Ed's Rareback and Rock Hall of Dance. These kids hammered out their lives against a hard scrape of concrete, glass storefronts, and run-down brownstones. Downtown was for shopping and rough dealings after sundown, not a place you actually made your home. More than us rural kids, the downtown ones ran the risk of going wild. Every year a drunken carload of them would go airborne in a spot called Death Dip, their soaring vehicle ripping off tree branches 15 feet in the air. Maybe they believed if they floored it fast enough and hard enough, they could actually escape this town. State troopers would find them in the fields the next morning, a leg here, arm there, their sweet flesh torn all to pieces. Pure Locust Street, people said, whenever any of them went astray. Kentucky is prone to acts of God, earthquakes, plagues of tornadoes, floods. So when they started having bomb drills at school, we thought of it as just more excitement. When the air horn blared, we hit the oak floorboards and scrambled under our desks as instructed. The bomb was coming. The big red button pushed by the woolly-bully finger of a depraved Russian. People talked on until finally our town got its bomb. It arrived in the form of an explosion that blew up just two families, the Bonaventures and the Chamberses. The newspaper ran photographs of the blaze that reared high above the giant oaks and melted the tar road in both directions. "A blast like an A-bomb," the caption read. Some speculated that this tragedy foretold that our town would be spared. Others said it was an omen of worse misfortune to come. True or not, the details of the explosion were stored in the collective memory of the town, along with the tale of the baby Dalton girl with the milk allergy who died from a pat of butter, and the 9-year-old swim champion who drowned in Dr. Isaac's well. Shall I read another excerpt? Or?
Yes, you can. Go ahead.
Okay. So this is just an excerpt that has to do with the town and the Chambers family daily life. The parents, Pearl and Cletus, the kids, Ruby and James, and Ruby is the person who tells the story. And the proprietor of the lounge is called Dallas Starr.
So you got about 5 minutes.
Okay. Saturday nights, my family ate dinner at the Carousel. Mom would have rather stayed home, but Dad liked to socialize. The dinners tasted good at the Carousel Lounge. Catfish and hush puppies, T-bone steaks with Diego salads, homemade cream pies. They served lamb fries with white gravy there, too. And if you don't know what that is, well, just try some first, and then maybe we'll tell you. All the booths had individual jukeboxes, red and white check tablecloths, where your husband might be talking confidentially to someone nestled back in the shadows. Dallas tried to run a tight ship. No drunks, no fights, or he might set you on the sidewalk. You could decide for yourself whether to go home where you belonged, or else swagger on down to the Alibi Club, where they open their doors to anybody, and where you might get yourself shot just for asking a lady to dance. Styles were less casual back then. Sports jackets and creased trousers, expertly ironed dresses were what we wore for a simple drive in the country. The 60s women were curvy, the men lean. As farmers and carpenters, they worked, not worked out. Nights out, my father's hair gleamed with pomade. My mother's blonde mane whipped into a variety of ringlets, turrets, and waves. She visited these afflictions on me as well, and a perm tomboy is a pathetic sight. One Saturday morning in June, I worked at the kitchen table, snapping the ends from half-runner beans and zipping out the tough string. My grandmother had taught me how to string beans on her front porch, to be careful not to break off too much and waste good food. After I filled the white enamel basin, Mom rinsed the beans and put them on to boil. Time moved slowly back then, and there was plenty of it. Time for grooming and time for conversation. Countrywomen kept up with the news through party lines. 10 or 12 houses with the same number lowered the price. You could pick up the phone anytime and join the conversation. Dad insisted that we have a private line, but he swore that my mom could talk for an hour to a wrong number. Saturday mornings, Carmen Gray visited without fail.